When I was a boy, I used to laugh at the old men who would sit around and bemoan the fact that they missed the good old days, the way things used to be. And I made a decision when I was young that I was never going to be that guy, that I was never going to complain about missing the past. And yet, now I find myself in a position where there are some things from the past that I miss, some things that I used to have that I don't have anymore. One of those things is the ability to have a conversation with somebody that disagrees with me without starting World War III. How do we function in a culture that refuses to listen? One of the things that happens in our culture today is that most conversations take place in Twitter-length bumper sticker comments. We don't often have the opportunity to sit down and rationally talk about things of real significance in any kind of depth. We sort of throw verbal bombs at each other. We talk past each other. We talk about each other a lot. But we don't contemplate our differences and try to come to some agreement. We're bifurcated. There's a dichotomy, two extremes with almost no middle. So what do? Well, in my mind, we have to keep attempting conversation, because you never know when you will find a person that is open to sit down and actually process things with you, even somebody that you disagree with. We have to at least keep trying that. We run into real struggles. I have a person who has been violently critical of my viewpoints and the things that I teach and the things that I say and the stands that I take. And I've had 3 appointments with this person set up so that we could meet together and talk. Neutral ground, space that's public so that we could just get together and talk. And he's canceled on me 3 times. He wants to yell at me, but he doesn't want to talk to me. So what do? Well, here's what I think. While we have to keep trying to pursue conversations about truth, there's another strategy that I think all believers are going to have to rely on, and that is that eventually, whether we can have the conversations or not, eventually truth wins out, because there is this pesky thing called reality. We now live in the middle of a generation that has set reality aside, and we pretend things that aren't true. We make up genders, and we toy with pronouns, and we pretend that we can be ourselves in our minds and yet not ourselves in our bodies. We separate the unity of the human existence into these moldable pieces. But here's the thing, for all of the nonsense, for all of the make-believe and pretend that we have held up as truth in this generation, we may just now be beginning to see the signs of reality reasserting itself. Let me give you an example. It's now been almost 10 years since the Supreme Court created out of whole cloth, a constitutional right to marry someone of the same sex. And yet, less than 10 years after that decision, a recent Gallup survey shows that nationally, support for same-sex marriage is receding. It's declining. It's becoming less and less supported by the public at large. Now, while the number of Americans who are in favor of gay marriage still remains high, it's still at 69%, which is a solid majority, it has declined in recent years from more than 80%, which is a pretty big drop in a pretty short time. And what's fascinating when you dive into the statistics is that the decrease of approval for same-sex marriage is seen not just among Republicans and independents, but also among Democrats. In other words, we're discovering reality. And the nonsense is beginning to be seen for the nonsense that it is. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected President of the United States. And in 2008, he said he believed that marriage was a relationship between a man and a woman. Now, that position is correct. He didn't maintain that position. In fact, after he was actually elected, he pretty quickly abandoned that position. And today, I imagine that there's probably not a single elected Democrat in Washington, D.C. who would make that statement that Barack Obama made in 2008, that marriage is between a man and a woman. Not only are there no Democrats that will make that statement, but there are fewer and fewer Republicans who will make that affirmation. And yet, while our politicians have still completely sold out to the lie, the man in the street is beginning to say, I think I have buyer's remorse about all of this. It's not turning out the way they told me. You see, same-sex marriage was sold to us as a solution to a grave social injustice. There were these people that we were told who just wanted to love whoever they wanted to love, and they just wanted to be left alone. They didn't like the definition of marriage being limited to relationships capable of producing children, which is sort of the moral equivalent of saying that we should have separate drinking fountains. That was their argument. So we heard story after story about people who were frustrated in love, who were denied hospital visitation. And all of those human interest stories worked. We bought the lie. Since then, we have replaced those simple concerns about partners being able to visit each other in the hospitals. Now we find gay men laying in a hospital bed holding a newly adopted baby, mimicking the pictures that we're so familiar with of new mothers holding their babies for the first time. In other words, we now see pictures that regularly try and sell us this story. We're just like you. But apparently, for a lot of Americans, those pictures and things like it are having the opposite effect. Middle America is having a tough time accepting that all of this normality is really normal at all. We've been taught that we only think about the happiness of the next 5 minutes, and we don't worry about the consequences over the next 100 years. And yet our 5 minutes seems to be up, and we're beginning to recognize the consequences. The campaign to redefine marriage was defined by slogans like love is love. We were made to feel like bad people if we dared to suggest that anything was more important than someone's happiness. But they told us they just wanted to be like everybody else. They just wanted to get married and be left alone. Only, as it turns out, those of us who talked about a slippery slope were right. Because while they just wanted to be like everybody else, turns out now we're not only supposed to feel bad that we didn't want them to get married, but now we have to allow drag queens to twerk in front of our children. And kids' moms are supposed to watch that and applaud it because it's somehow judgmental to object. Same-sex marriage was sold to us as an act of tolerance, and yet immediately upon accepting the terms, the people who agreed to be tolerant started getting sued. We said, okay, same-sex marriage, let everybody marry whoever they love. We'll all just tolerate each other. Only almost from day one, they then proceeded to tell us that we had to use their preferred pronouns. We had to display a pride flag in our cubicles at work during the month of June. and we had to affirm that men can now have babies. Failure to comply risks being ostracized socially, or worse, being sued until your business and your livelihood are completely destroyed. You can excuse Americans for wondering where the messaging of tolerance got lost in all of this. Now, it's not clear yet whether support for same-sex marriage has peaked and is finally on its way out, or whether this is a blip in the moment because of contemporary circumstances. We don't know. But I do know this. If we can't have conversations, if nobody will listen to what we say, if we can't share our take on truth, our only other option is to wait it out. Because I promise you this, over time, lies are always exposed as lies. You see, you can pretend that men and women are the same, that kids will be fine without both parents, but the reality is those premises are destined to fail because they're just not true. It's not that proponents of same-sex marriage necessarily had bad intentions, but they were fighting the laws of the universe. They were fighting against reality. I mean, think about it this way. The laws of the universe exist even if we find them inconvenient. We can march in the streets and say, we disregard the law of gravity. We can pass laws and we can say the law of gravity has been suspended. We can hold rallies and we can hang flags and we can have an anti-gravity flag and we can celebrate that I'm no longer bound by gravity. It's not an oppressive force in my life. I've been freed from it. You can do all of those things until you climb up on the roof of your house and step off, and guess what? Gravity reasserts itself. Because the laws of the universe, not just the physical laws like gravity, but the moral laws that flow out of the nature of a creator God, those laws are not up for public vote. They're not up for political negotiation. They're not up for cultural compromise. They are what they are. And we can pretend otherwise, but they will always reassert themselves. Let me share this verse from 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. The Apostle Paul is writing to the Corinthian church, a church, by the way, that was living in what was probably the most highly sexualized city of the ancient world. And Paul says this, "But a natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned." See, part of the reason we can't have conversations any longer is because we're talking to people who are natural-minded. And natural-minded people cannot comprehend spiritual truth. We keep having the conversation, we keep speaking truth because we hope in this conversation or that interaction that the Spirit of God is able to break through in a way that transforms a natural mind to a spiritual mind so that that person can grasp what's true. But at the end of the day, even if we don't see success in our conversations, we still live by the reality that both natural laws and moral laws are not up for vote. They're not up for grabs. They're not up for discussion even. They are what they are. And in the end, reality, pesky reality, it will always assert itself, and truth will always win. Be encouraged. I miss good, hearty conversations with people that disagree with me. I would love to have those more often. But I am encouraged that whether those kinds of conversations happen or not, truth is truth. God is God. And reality is reality. and everything turns out, in the end, the way it was meant to. This is Truth Currents.